We'd like to welcome all to this presentation. We're going to be talking about hybrid IT approach and technologies on AWS. I'm Dario Rivera, Solutions Architect. Been with Amazon for about 2.5 years. Previously, about 17 years across many different organizations, from the FBI and a few other three-letter acronyms. Mohammed, who is from NetApp, him a little later as part of the presentation that he's going to be doing. And the thing that we're going to be talking about most when it comes to hybrid IT, a specific integration occurs and how we can be assured that we recognize where the opportunities for movement into the cloud can be possible. It can seem a little overwhelming when you think about what it takes to move to cloud, but the interesting thing is that those who actually have adopted it have recognized that it's not just an all-in perspective, or we only go one way or another, or we only go with this cloud provider or that cloud provider, which can be a little bit overwhelming when you want to think about moving full workloads and multiple workloads of solutions that are being managed on-prem into the cloud. We all understand the value of cost savings and elasticity, but how do we deal with the movement of so many different applications that have had such a long history of working on-prem? And the amount of investment that's being put into the infrastructure supporting that, all of a sudden now possibly being removed and now being adopted in the cloud, it's not something that people want to take on whole hog. So what we're going to be talking about is reflective of ways of integrating that infrastructure, and what are not only the AWS services that are available to individuals to integrate that infrastructure, but also third-party vendors that have capabilities that run very well with AWS that are allowing for that integration to occur. We're also going to take that to the next level as we start speaking about what it takes from a people perspective when we talk about DevOps and the aspects of no longer just integrating from a networking perspective where you get physical infrastructure that's now merging with virtual infrastructure, but how do you allow for new deployments of solutions, new deployments of software being integrated onto the cloud, or somehow continually making them hybrid where they work together from on-premise and cloud. And then we go into a little bit more related to compliance and the controls that need to be put in place. And we look at it from an enterprise perspective and say, what are the things that I have to be thinking about to be preemptive of adopting cloud, where it's not just the solutions, but it's also the processes and the people and the controls that need to assure that these things are going to be working effectively for the long term. So there's a big aspect of I've moved one solution to the cloud, yay, everybody's happy, but now how do I get this to work at scale? So as we can see, our journey is moving from the hybrid integration all the way to the integrated platform and beyond, where there's steps involved, and this can happen in a multi-phase kind of aspect. And to relate that, this is what AWS has done over and over again for a lot of our big customers, and even for government customers, where they want to see how they can deal with the ebb and flow of the long journey for 5, 7, 10 years out, and knowing that AWS is going to support that journey in their mission. So what we're going to do is I'm going to use sort of a sample, theoretical example of a customer that I've worked with and show how they approach trying to move to the cloud and the kind of questions I ask them in regards to the things to think about. Because when they come to someone like me who's a solutions architect and they say, well, here's our plan, and what do you think about that? And what approaches can be used to maybe augment what our original plan is? And one of the 4 things that are coming across as things that they're not really thinking about or questions that they're not addressing is related to some of the things that are noted down in the benefits. Who is going to be paying for this? We know in government that can be kind of a complicated question. It's not just the single organization, the 3-letter acronym, but it's related to all the sub-agencies under them, all the different projects and cost allocations that are put into that from a procurement process. And one of the biggest challenges is related to procurement and how you identify the changes in the policies from procurement to assure that the right type of cost efficiencies are built into it. And then it's moving into, well, we procured this AWS account, but should this possibly be multiple accounts so that they understand the value of the boundaries from a security and policy and cost perspective as to knowing who's going to be paying for what and what kinds of attestations are being put in place to assure that the right types of people are accessing the right types of resources. And the ones who are not identified to be accessing those resources are not. Then we moved into security, which is related to, yes, they have application security and they're approaching security from a traditional networking perspective, but they're not taking into account some of the things that are offered to them out of the box with AWS. When we talk about security groups and NACLs and the port allocations being opened or closed, or how they're assuring that they're getting the proper levels of encryption being put in place, or if they're using identity and access management correctly, so that they're identifying the roles and the policies associated to those roles to assure that the right type of granularity from an access provisioning standpoint is put in place. So all of that is sort of reflective of this stack of integration that is necessary to be thinking about when you think about cloud adoption, and specifically from a hybrid IT perspective. So we're going to be talking about the bare bones infrastructure, what are the services that can be built on top of that infrastructure from an AWS perspective as well as from a vendor perspective. Then we move into the platform and how the platforms are kind of built into place to allow for these workloads to be integrated in. And then finally to the actual solutions, the software that the users are going to be interfacing with. So let's go into the integrated infrastructure. And the first thing that typically most customers think about from an integrated hybrid IT approach is, well, we want to connect the two clouds. Well, what's the simplest way to do that from a secure perspective? We put a VPN in place. And more often than not, there is a router that is at the edge border of the on-prem cloud, a customer cloud. We have a virtual solution that's hosted on AWS, or you can use an AWS hardware VPN that's offered to you as part of the VPC service, and you make that connection. And it's great, but often what ends up happening is this works maybe for one workload, possibly two, but it doesn't really scale, and there's bandwidth concerns. And there's issues around how do we assure that when we have thousands of users wanting to be using 20, 30, 50 different software solutions running on the cloud, that they have the capability of accessing it without worrying about latency, without worrying about a couple of seconds going by every time a click occurs. So what ends up happening is that we transition into a more dedicated type of solution with something called Direct Connect. And this is just a VIF that is offered to you from a public and private perspective. And there's a third-party colo provider involved with the connection between what you're using to get to AWS and the presence that AWS has in this colo provider. There's typically two that are within CONUS. You have a company called Equinix as well as another one called CoreSite. And they have these massive data centers that are being offered to telco providers for presence of their customers residing within those data centers. And Amazon is also one of those capabilities of having a presence within those colo providers. So you can work with your telco provider to essentially make that cross-connect via CoreSite or Equinix so that you have dedicated either 10 gig or 1 gig connections or multiples thereof that are available to you from a bandwidth perspective. I know that I work with customers that they look at 10 gig and they sort of smirk and say, that's great, but we need a lot more. And the nice thing is that you can procure multiple 10 gig connections with Direct Connect and have full mesh capabilities so that you get all that bandwidth capability directly into the AWS cloud. So that back and forth of data transfer happens at a much more efficient rate than working through a VPN that might be traversing the internet. So as we move further into the mix, now we think about how to secure that, because Direct Connect alone is a dedicated pipe, but now you can put VPN on top of that to assure that you have edge-to-edge encryption being put in place to assure that you're getting that security layer that you're looking forward to as well, which is critically important. To note, you always see this with AWS, and as part of my ongoing talk, you'll see me stress this over and over again. Capability is very important, but security should always be the priority, and security shouldn't be compromised for capability. And what you often see as part of the solutions that Amazon recommends and the services that they build is that they're always putting the layers of security on top of their services to assure that they're giving customers that option. They don't mandate upon them to use the layers of security that they recommend, but you know that you will always have that capability and feature available to you. So now we go into integrated services, and this is really reflective of how do we get this, now that we have the connectivity and the networking, so the so-called physical or layer 2 and layer 3 aspects are being put in place from an OSI model perspective. How do we actually make this enterprise ready? So you have identity and access management, which is a directly related integrated service with AWS to manage groups and users and resources. But if you have all that capability already available to you on your premises, then should you make a replicate of all that user integrated structure now available from an access perspective just to access AWS resources? And the answer is no. The nice thing about AWS is that there have been a lot of capabilities being built over the years to offer Active Directory integration so that you can use the resources and the structure of capability that you have for people management already built in place for you from your on-prem resources now being integrated into the cloud. So this starts out from a specific model related to being able to take the domain controllers that you have been utilizing on-prem and building replications of those in the cloud so that you can have those domain controllers being available to you from a read-write perspective, or if you're not comfortable for that, strictly from a read perspective. And what this offers is you not having to traverse the bridge between AWS into the on-prem resource to do authentication. You can have those credentials available to you in the cloud so that when people want to access the cloud resources, they go directly to the domain controllers resident with AWS, get the accreditation they need to be able to actually do work. So it's a very, very quick way of getting results. The challenge with that is that the administration costs are a bit high. Because security is put forth as first in regards to integrating solutions on AWS, the concept of security groups were essentially just cloud firewalls need to be properly configured in order to assure that AD would be working correctly. And sometimes this can be, depending on your understanding of AD, a trial and error type of a process. So for instance, you look toward the bottom left of that slide and you see that those are all the ports from a TCP and UDP perspective that need to be open to assure that AD is going to be doing its job correctly. So what does that mean? Well, can we have a more cloud-ready way of offering this capability? And the answer is yes. Amazon offers a directory service, AWS directory service, that has sort of two flavors behind it. One is a simple AD, and what that is that if you are strictly only cloud kind of capability, you have a directory service that is offered to you, essentially just Samba 4, that allows you to have Active Directory capability directly with the compute resources and the users that are managing it. You want to go beyond that, and obviously why you're all here is how do we get that integrated with what I already have on-prem? Well, with that is the Directory Service Connect. And what that is taking Active Directory that is already kind of meshed into the service layer of AWS and integrating that with what you already have from your domain controllers that you are building on-prem. And noting that this is going through the dedicated bandwidth that we've already discussed via Direct Connect, you get very, very high bandwidth capabilities to allow Active Directory within your cloud resources. So you go, so what does that offer me? I still have to have that concern around latency of going full travel down to my on-prem resource back up. Well, what it does give you is SAML. It offers you single sign-on capability to a lot of the integrated services that are offered out of AWS directly. So when we think about workspaces and workmail and work docs, and being able to get single sign-on capability directly from there, noting what is already available for you from the structure of AD that you have on-prem, now you have capability built in to assure that you have very, very seamless integration with Active Directory on AWS. So this kind of moves into sort of the conversation associated to people and how that relates to assuring you're getting the ultimate understanding of compliance. So when we think about people and resources, we have to start thinking about roles. And roles are typically from you think about how you build your AD, is associated to what you get in regards to identifying the use cases in which these people play within your organization. So there may be folks who manage strictly money and accounting and provisioning, and they should have limited access into what is available to them in the network from a software perspective, as well as access to the network. You have dev and test, and they have different capabilities that are very, very different than what an accounting person should do. You might have an auditor who would have comes in on a very quick basis to look at what you're doing, be able to see it, understand it, provide the proper types of reporting against the controls that are put in place, make the recommendations to harden your resources, and then you should be able to shut off his account so that he no longer has access to that. So with that, there should be some accreditation being put in place to assure that these individuals and the roles that they play are doing the right things on AWS. So with that, we have solutions built in to assure that there is a trail, an audit trail of everything being done within your cloud environment. One is called CloudWatch. So CloudWatch gives you the ability to have baked-in metrics into some of the services that are offered directly out of the box, EC2 being one of them, so that you can see the performance of a box, the CPU utilization, you can see the network bandwidth associated to your fleet of instances, and what that does is directly connect to the notification service, simple notification service, where you can set alarms so that if, for whatever reason, your compute resources are performing poorly, you have notification directly applied to an email of some sort, maybe it's a list email or direct administrator, to now have some actionable event occur. Then that moves to CloudTrail, and what CloudTrail does is take that to the next level associated with assuring that every call that's made on your cloud resources is somehow being logged. It's even errors associated to that call where access is not allowed that is now being applied to assure that you have notification of that. And that's really important when you think of possibly folks who are not doing so nice things, and noting that there's a pattern that you can see from an evidence perspective to see where those nice things are occurring, and make sure that you put the right blocks in place that they don't do that anymore. So having these capabilities is really important. And what's noted is that this can be taken to the next level. Not only do you do it from a cloud perspective, you can provide solutions built onto that are related to things like being able to see all your flow logs from a packet perspective. We can go back one slide again, sorry about that. As well as assuring that you have some way of having IDS or IPS, intrusion detection or intrusion protection, built into those solutions. So we have third-party vendors like Trend Micro and Alert Logic that have those integrated capabilities put in place. So now we go into the integrated platform, and that's related to looking at what it means to build solutions that are easily deployed. So we've talked about hybrid integration, we've talked about all the networking capability that's necessary to assure that on-prem is working well with your cloud resources. And now that's sort of transitioning into Well, how do we get our software up there and do it in a way that's reproducible and easy to work with? So typically when you think about software, you also think about dependencies. And there has to be a lot of different other pieces of software besides your own that you may be managing needing to be put in place, such as that stack you see on the left, in order for your software to work right. So things like the Linux operating system, Log4j for logging, Spring for Java, Tomcat and Apache for web serving capability, and then all of a sudden comes your website. So the nice thing about what Amazon offers is the capability of giving you flexibility as to how you want to deploy. So you can start with a gold image, and a gold image may have some of the components of that stack already reproduced inside of that image. And anytime you want to deploy new code, you don't have to start from scratch to deploy all these dependencies before you actually get into your code to reproduce the production of the website. You can create this image or an AMI and then have that image deployed into an actual instance of your choosing, anywhere from 2 cores to 32 cores. And then you deploy your code directly onto that and make it set up from a configuration standpoint. We even have a user data, metadata that allows you to automate that process to actually all of a sudden see your site live and ready to go within your private environment that is from a hybrid perspective. So what ends up happening is that with that level of flexibility, you recognize that there's some undifferentiated heavy lifting that is going on where you're doing the same thing over and over. And how do you get away from that? So we start talking about DevOps and we start talking about scripting and capabilities from an automation perspective. And to note that Amazon provides you a lot of services out of the box that gives you that kind of capability. What you notice here are 4 different solutions: Elastic Beanstalk, OpsWorks, CloudFormation, as well as Do-It-Yourself on Demand, that shows you, based off of what type of reproducibility you want, you have the flexibility to choose which kind of service gives you that. So Elastic Beanstalk starts from scratch in terms of a simple website where you might have an app and database tier or a web app and database tier, and knowing that you're just doing the same thing over and over when deploying new code. Well, Beanstalk takes that model and says, well, all you have to do is deploy your new code, your WAR file, your jar file, .NET file, into this Beanstalk, and we'll set up the whole stack for you from an AWS service perspective with the right types of security controls and assure that the database is put in place correctly so you can get your site live. And after you deploy that code, you press start, and you see an endpoint that's representative of your website, ready to go, load balanced, happy. Then we move into OpsWorks, where it's more of an end-tier function, where there might be a lot more flexibility from offering DevOps types of solutions such as Chef integrated into that service to assure that you're getting the right results you need from a fast deployment scenario. Then we move into CloudFormation. So when you think about enterprise environments that are fully fledged and very, very complex routing, networking capability, and to assure that that snowflake, that very fragile thing that took a lot of work to put together right, and all of a sudden now you have to make a replicate of that, again on AWS. How do you get that to happen without having to take the hours of work to make that occur just properly the first time around? Well, CloudFormation gives you that capability. It's infrastructure as code. It's a JSON script with keywords, riddled into it to assure that AWS understands what that JSON is saying to get you that fully fledged, ready to go network that is very, very complicated and difficult to reproduce, all for you in a matter of minutes to possibly a half hour. So it's got some really, really powerful results behind it. And then you go down the traditional way, which is, I want to do this all myself. I'm very comfortable with that. I'm still learning DevOps, but I'm not too sure how to do everything. So let me just keep on the route that I understand from a traditional networking perspective. And so you have on-demand, ready-as-you-go AMIs. So here's sort of an example of where that comes out. You may have your automation controls built on-prem. Obviously, you're working through Direct Connect. You have CloudFormation scripts that are stored in S3 as a storage service You use another service that we offer called Code Deploy, and what that is it takes CloudFormation scripts as well as AMIs and different deployment packages and allows you to deploy that into a fleet of servers ready to go within a VPC. So it takes the benefits of Elastic Beanstalk and moves that to the flexibility of CloudFormation, along with giving you all the capabilities of automatically deploying that into a fully fledged environment ready to go. So if you needed a fleet of servers that manages 10, 20, 30, 100 websites, all of them in different ways, but you have all of that scripted out, you can now apply that into Code Deploy and immediately get the results you need instead of having to manually click and build all of that from scratch. So with that, you see that you get flexibility and scalability of managing massive amounts of data. Here's another kind of solution relating to Elastic MapReduce. And what this is integrating many aspects of big data that you would be thinking about from all the aggregated data that you're building in and holding onto on-prem, and moving that into an automated fashion into a data warehouse hosted on AWS. Elastic MapReduce is a Hadoop infrastructure that many people use it from a big data perspective for ETL or extract, transform, and load. And what that does is now integrate that directly from a loading perspective into something like Redshift, which is this massive petabyte scale data warehousing capability for analytical reporting. So just showing you the many patterns that you can use when working with AWS. So with that, you move further into integration solutions and note that there are many different third-party vendors that work on AWS for very common workloads that come from a hybrid perspective. Salim's going to go through what you get with NetApp on tap. But some other ones that you'll notice is related to the common scenario that is challenging for many customers related to moving data from on-prem into the cloud. They love the value of cloud, they love the elasticity and the cost savings, but there can be some challenges related to getting a petabyte of data from on-prem into the cloud. And you definitely don't want to do that via SneakerNet where somehow you're moving into a storage facility and they're taking care of that for you. So there are a number of different devices that both Amazon via something called Storage Gateway as well as third-party vendors use, such as NetApp, to manage that data transfer for you, where it happens in a very integrated fashion. And this happens in such a way of caching local data that's on-prem so that you get immediate access as necessary, but behind the scenes, those devices that are managing that storage on-prem are moving incrementally that storage into the cloud. And they're doing it in such a way that's encrypted, it's deduplicated, and it's very efficient. So you don't get paid for ingress in, which is nice, but you do have to pay for egress out. And note that using these storage solutions to manage how that egress out is being transferred so that it does that compression and encryption for you. So instead of having to transfer, let's say, 100 gigabytes of data, because of the compression models, maybe you're only transferring 20 gigabytes of data, you're actually saving cost using some of these storage solutions built in. This also occurs from a backup and archiving perspective. So when we talked about real time, now we talk about, well, how do you get the traditional tape library concepts that many organizations use built in? Well, Storage Gateway has a VTL. There are other third-party solutions that also have virtual tape libraries. So all the archiving software that you've used in the past, Symantec, NetBackup, as well as many others, now have integration with something like Storage Gateway. So from a volume archiving tape perspective, you also have the capability of moving that storage into the cloud. So what ends up happening is that you take a lot of these actual building blocks, all these integrated solutions, and you move that into being preemptive about what it is that you want to make sure that you're taking care of. And that's really where it relates to building the right types of components that you can say, I've checked the box and I've made sure that the right type of people are involved when I think about procurement or when I think about portfolio analysis or when I want to assure that I truly understand the requirements. So instead of just one workload and then another workload and then another workload, how are we looking at this problem in aggregate? Has provided a cloud adoption framework that is noted here on this from our white papers, that essentially looks at many of the common problems that enterprises have, and saying that to assure that we're properly educating our customers on what they need to be doing from a cloud perspective to do that integration properly. So from that white paper, you as an organization stakeholder have the capability of defining a roadmap associated to what you believe you should be interested in managing across your enterprise. And so you don't have to take all the recommendations built whole hog, but you can take bits and pieces from what's identified in this cloud adoption framework and make it available and tailor in such a way that works for your organization. So along with that, a lot of these third-party solutions that I talked about previously, along with many other, over 1,000 right now, are being available to you as pre-vetted, pre-loaded software ready to go in AWS on an AMI. You have one-click solutions where you say, I understand the licensing model as defined by the vendor. I am willing to pay for that. I understand the EC2 costs based off of the AMIs that this vendor has been pre-packaging. And I say click, and now I have that software available to me that I can use immediately. So all the negotiating associated with a vendor, all the aspects of trying to procure that goes away because now you have the marketplace to give you that software immediately. So the takeaways are pretty straightforward. There's many different ways of connecting to AWS that we've talked about. There are aspects associated to hybrid IT that you should be thinking about from an enterprise perspective to assure that all the different roles that need to be playing to make that cohesive whole of a cloud adoption possible, you get through the cloud adoption framework. And as such, there are a lot of tools that are provided to you by AWS as well as third-party vendors to make you successful. So now I'm going to introduce Salim Muhammad from NetApp. And he's a senior cloud evangelist that has been working with cloud for about 15 years from HP and now on NetApp. And he's very passionate about cloud computing and advanced technologies. And he's going to be speaking about some of the NetApp solutions and really the use cases that NetApp has put in place to make hybrid IT work with AWS.
Thanks, Dario. Hello, Kenny? You're good. I'm good? Okay, thanks, Dario. So as Dario mentioned, I'm going to talk about hybrid IT. The way things are moving, right?
You might want to check the boxes on.
Okay. Oh, it's on.
Okay. Yeah, I think you're good now.
Okay. Hello. The way things are moving, right, we saw the benefit or the innovation that happens on the AWS Cloud, right? By consuming that, it gives you access to that innovation. That access to the innovation helps you in two ways. One is you having access to innovation. The other one is it also allows you to innovate within your own environment, right? The amount of time you spend on your operations management as well as development, that can be reduced and balanced, and that can be introduced into innovation, right? So it gives you that capability to access the innovation and the adoption of innovation. So NetApp, so quick introduction, storage and data management company, $6.1 billion in revenue, exabyte of storage ship per quarter, number one in the US government, Germany and Australia market share, storage OS. That's a quick intro to NetApp. Then let's talk about hybrid IT or the hybrid business service. So this is the customer's viewpoint, right? So you have your on-premise environment, and then you have your cloud. And then you have data that moves back and forth across these environments. And the key aspect of data is that, right, you need to manage the data, you need to have the capability to do data portability across to your across the hybrid cloud environment, and you need to have data services, right? Data without it being accessed by the applications, you will not be able to drive value out of the data. So that is the key factor, right? So this is the scenario, and you want to manage the data across the enterprise lifecycle. The way you used your data on your on-premise, the same way you want to use the data on your hybrid cloud model, right? So that is the key factor. And you have your workloads running on both environments. Now let's talk about some of the workloads, right? Some of them are Key workloads are quick moves. If you want to try out the hybrid cloud, some of them help you actually do innovation consumption. Some of you help you in bursting your capacity. So let's talk about some of the workloads, right? So analytics. I mean, you've got a lot of data, right? You get data for forensic research, you get data for various other kinds of analytic processing. And this data, right, so you can spin up Hadoop clusters. But the ability to spin up multiple Hadoop clusters on demand and using this data to consume that is very powerful, right? It gives you a lot of insight in what you're trying to do. So that is a key workload, and that's an elastic workload. You spin up these Hadoop clusters and you spin them down, right? That's a great workload. Applications, dev test is a very common workload. You can use dev test on the cloud, on AWS Cloud. That gives you two things, right? One is it gives you elasticity, it gives you scalability, and also it gives you a cloud-based architecture for your application. And then you can do the production on the cloud, or you can bring the production on-premise. But your application has become architected with auto-scaling, with other capabilities. Disaster recovery is a key factor. Then scientific application modeling. Then let's look at backup and archive. Right, so tape storage, right? So tape storage is very cumbersome, number one. Retrieval, restore is a problem. And you have so much of data, right? Storage is growing at the rate of 1.5 times the minimum year over year. So what do you want to do with the data? You can take a disk backup within your environment. You can take tape backup. But disk backup is expensive. Tape backup is going to be a cumbersome process to restore, to recover. So the cloud gives you an easy way to have storage over there. You can use S3, you can move it over to Glacier. It also gives you a hierarchical storage management capability, right? That allows you to use your on-prem storage effectively, at the same time give you access to cloud storage with cost optimization. And also that cloud storage also gives you the foothold for disaster recovery and disaster planning. Because you can take the data, you can move your workloads onto AWS Cloud, and then you can restore the data back onto the cloud, and you can bring up your workload. So that means you can actually do disaster recovery, you can do compute scaling, you can do a lot of other capabilities. So disaster planning and consolidation. I mean, cloud gives you an opportunity to consolidate your data centers, right? You can move your data to the cloud from multiple locations, and then you can consolidate the data, and then take the workload onto cloud and bring them back again. So those are the features. Now, in terms of, we talked about all these capabilities, right? And then there are a whole bunch of solutions that address this capability. We will talk about those solutions in the context of the use case and also customer case studies. So let's talk about RTI International. This is a customer case study. So it's a non-profit institution supporting about 4,000 researchers. And one of the key factors they have is that since this is a research organization, they have to use new workloads, and they have to bring up these workloads. So that consumes compute capabilities, storage capabilities. And then these workloads are spun up and they are spun down. So it is not a steady state workload, right? So if you want to do, and there are multiple such projects, if you want to do this workload or these workloads on your on-premise environment, then you have to go and start creating your infrastructure matrix, you start creating your load the applications on top of that, you have to monitor it, manage it, virtualize it, and then you have to bring it down, and then you have to repurpose it, right? So that's a big process. Normally, right, what we see is that once you give resource to a user, you don't get it ever back. Right, the resource stays there, it becomes very difficult to repurpose it. Now, cloud gave them a good opportunity, right? So they can go to AWS, they can spin up the resources, they can start putting their workloads on top of that, they can do the research, whatever research they want to do. They want to do analytics research. I mean, you have the capability available there, you can use that research. And once the work is done, you can spin it down. So you don't have the complete life cycle of procurement. You have the resources on demand available and for you to use it. Now, the key factor that they also had is that they wanted data control, they wanted data compliance. So they did not want to put their data, they wanted to have total control of their data. So they wanted to have an extension of their on-premise data center for their data alone. And as Dario mentioned, right, you can do VPN, right? VPN is latency, right? Latency is a problem. So the other solution they opted for is what is called as a co-location solution. They put their data onto Equinix co-location center, And that has a connectivity to AWS, a direct connectivity to AWS, which is about 4 to 7 milliseconds. And 4 to 7 milliseconds, right, almost all your transaction applications can run on it. So they replicated the data from their on-premise environment to the co-location facility, which was their own cage, which was an extension of their data center. So that means they extended their on-premise to Equinix co-location, and they were able to consume compute elasticity. So as these new projects came in, there was no problem, absolutely self-service. It was minutes for them to actually spin up these new projects, consume whatever resources they want to consume on demand, scale it up and down, and whenever the work is done, they want to finish it and bring it back. So that is if you look at the architecture over here, so the data is in the data center, and the data was replicated using SnapMirror technology onto the what we call as the NetApp private storage that is there on the Equinix Colo. So the data was controlled. They were able to, data governance, data sovereignty, data security, data policy, all of those were implemented, and then they could still go and consume AWS for compute elasticity. This gave them effective absolute control over their data, and also gave them the ability to consume their workloads. This is actually give them business flexibility and agility. At the end of the day, right, what you're really looking for is that you want that flexibility, you want that agility, and you want to also have elasticity of your consumption, and you also want to have innovation. So I want to talk about another use case. This is the Northumberland County use case, and they had a similar model, right? So their data center, they didn't want to increase the capacity on their data center. And the data center also, they want to do disaster recovery, disaster planning. So they had a similar solution with their data moved on to the NetApp private storage, and they could go and consume compute elasticity. And they also used this for their DR. Since the data was available on the private storage, whenever they had a problem, whatever reason, flood, whatever reason, they could just move the workload onto AWS and start consuming it. It gave them two things. It gave them elasticity, it gave them disaster recovery, it also gave them the option of disaster planning. So let's talk about another solution, right? So this use case, so people are all used to their enterprise data management capabilities. Now, how do you transport this enterprise data management capability onto AWS? You like the elasticity that AWS provides. You like the capability that AWS provides. You like the innovation that happens on AWS. Now, how do you consume it? And then still have the same enterprise data management capability? You have been using NAS, you have been using KIFs, you have been using NFS. How do you use those capabilities on AWS? And also, how do you replicate your data to AWS, right? So those are the key factors, right? And this can be used for all kinds of workloads. You can use it for DevOps workloads, you can use it for prod workloads, you can use it for analytics workloads, you can use it for business applications, you can use it for mobile applications. So the key solution here is called Cloud on Tap. Cloud on Tap sits on EC2, and it's a software data management capability similar to what you have on your on-premise environment. CDOT capability, it's similar to that sits on AWS on a EC2 instance, and it encapsulates EBS and exposes EBS and gives you the data management capability that you are so accustomed to on the enterprise. It gives you NAS capabilities, it gives you all the protocols that you want to do, so that way you can still have your data management capability and still consume AWS resources, right? So that's a key factor, and you can manage it using Cloud Manager. You can put all your workloads. You can put your SQL workloads, you can put your Oracle workloads, you can put your SharePoint workloads, you can put your Exchange workloads. So it gives you the ability to use all the workloads on AWS with the same data management capability and file access protocols that you're so accustomed to on the enterprise. And also, the other key factor is that you can also move your data back and forth, right? You have your data on your enterprise, and you can ship the data back onto the cloud, right? It's an easy way. It's automatic, it's controlled, and you have total control of the whole environment. The other use case I want to talk to you about is the backup and archive. So on your on-premise, you may have a single backup technology, very rare. You will have multiple backup technologies, and you'll also have the tape backup technologies. Now, how do you consolidate all these things, and how do you control the growth of storage, right? So your storage is growing. I mean, there's no way you can, you need that data, but how do you effectively store that data on the cloud, right? The cloud storage is an easy way to store data. It gives you hierarchical storage management. You want to use S3, you want to use object-based repository, and then you want to move it over to Glacier over a period of time. Because today the retention, right, maybe 6 months, maybe 7 years, maybe God knows how long, right? So there's another solution called NetApp Alta Vault. It's a cloud integrated storage. What it does is that it's integrated to S3, and also at the same time, it has got a local cache, and it's got interfaces to various other backup technologies that you have. So once you deploy it, it pulls the data from all your other backup technologies. It could be whatever RMAN, it could be whatever backup technologies, and then it moves the data over to S3 on the cloud. And you can use it for disaster recovery, disaster planning, etc. So Storage Grid is a similar kind of technology which allows you to use AWS S3 capability for object-based and file-based storage. And I mean, this is just a chart of what NetApp supports. So you can use these technologies today. You can go to AWS Marketplace. You can use Cloud on Tap. There's also virtual appliance you can use there in AWS Marketplace, and then you can also look at NPS also, right? All these solutions are available, and this will give you compute elasticity. This will give you access to innovation. This will give you access to bringing up your workloads in a hybrid model, enables you to support your hybrid IT as well as your hybrid business service. Thank you.
Right. Before wrapping up,